Before I start, I should give maybe a little bit of background about myself. Obviously, I'm not indigenous. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I went to college and medical school in St. Louis at Washington University and was a pediatrician for 1 year with an interest in infectious diseases. And after an internship in pediatrics, I was fortunate enough to be given a position at Rocky Mountain Labs as a postdoctoral trainee, and lived in Hamilton from 72 to 75, was transferred back to Maryland, the main NIH, for a couple of years, and returned as a tenured investigator at Rocky Mountain Labs in 1977. And in 2002, Tony Fauci, who was our director at that time, asked me to become the associate director for Rocky Mountain Laboratories, and that's a position that, well, I've held now, I guess, for 22 years. And my own area of research is in tick-borne viruses, tick-borne infections of viruses, and a little bit of bacteria. So that's just sort of my personal background. My wife of 50-some-odd years, Tonya, spent 34 years on the school board in Corvallis, Montana, and also as president of the Montana State School Board Association, fighting for public education for everyone, battles which are now in jeopardy, and I think we all have to be aware of that. I have two grown-up sons, both of whom are scientists, one of whom is also a physician. One lives in Seattle, and the other lives in Boston, so it's a transcontinental family, which, but fortunately with Facebook and FaceTime and things like that, we're able to keep in touch with our three grandchildren. So anyway, one more thing before I start, I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm not indigenous, although I've learned so much from Betty and Natalie and my other friends here at the Blackfeet, as well as friends at Salish Kootenai and the University of Montana. My interactions with the Blackfeet Nation began, I'm guessing, about a decade ago with interacting with Annie Belcourt and Lelena Oldperson at the University of Montana and their Pathways to Pre-Pharmacy program, which really opened my eyes to the desire for science and research in among the Blackfeet Nation. And then somehow Betty Fleming and Natalie Malater got into that discussion, and Natalie has been down to Rocky Mountain Lab a number of times with students from the college, and this is my second year at the conference, and I consider it a great honor and privilege to be able to talk in this venue with so many elders of the Blackfeet Nation and others who I hope will also listen. And I hope that, as I said, I'm not indigenous, although I'm trying to learn, so I hope that nothing I say comes across as offensive to indigenous sensibilities. But if I do, please let me apologize in advance and come up to me afterwards and whisper in my ear what I said that I shouldn't have said. So let's cross your fingers. So this is Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Hamilton last winter, when we actually had a little bit of snow. But I, of course, recognize and acknowledge the fact that all of Montana, as well as all of North America, was home to a bunch of indigenous peoples, and the land was taken from them forcibly. And I, for one, recognize the responsibility that places on people like me who are trying to promote interactions with Native Americans. And I hope that we're able to take as good care of the resources as the indigenous people did for so many thousands of years before that. So I work for the National Institutes of Health, which I like to describe as like our nation's National Biomedical Research University, although it's not a university. And like a university, there would be a president or a chancellor. That chancellor now is a woman named Monica Bertagnolli, who's, you could tell by the name, also not indigenous, but is from Wyoming, small town in Wyoming. She's a cancer doctor. And like any university, there would be a variety of colleges, like Montana State or the University of Montana. There's a law school, a business school, an arts and science college, a forestry school, music school. And in the National Institutes of Health, or NIH categorization, those colleges are referred to individual institutes or centers. And there's 27 institutes and centers focused around either disease processes or body systems. So for example, there's the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute. So they study heart, lung, and blood diseases and physiology. The National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and so forth and so on. One of those institutes is called the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. One of those colleges is called the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And like in a college, like in a university, each college would have a dean. And our dean, we have a new dean over the last 2 years, Jeannie Marazzo, who's our director now. She took over from Tony Fauci, who was basically the director since the mid-1980s, literally saved millions and millions of lives in the United States and abroad, but was excoriated and criticized by members of the government for trying to tell the truth about public health and some messages that people didn't want to hear. So Tony retired in 1922, and after a long search, Jeannie was selected as the director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. She's a warm and very wonderful person. Her specific research interests are in women's health and sexually transmitted infections. And when I told her last month that I was coming to Browning, she said, "Oh, what an exciting opportunity. Please extend my regards to everyone in Browning, and maybe if we're lucky we'll get her up here someday to Browning, because she very much loves wildlife and particularly loves birds. So I think maybe we have an opportunity with her." So Rocky Mountain Labs was, you can trace the beginnings, not as far back as the Blackfeet histories go, but to the early part of the 20th century when this disease emerged in western Montana. Brand new disease. No Europeans had ever heard of it before. They didn't know what caused it, didn't know how it was spread, didn't know how to prevent it, didn't know how to treat it. In today's world, if an infectious disease like that emerged, we would treat it as a high consequence infectious agent and probably treat it at a high level of biological containment. Interestingly, the disease popped up among the Europeans, settlers in the Bitterroot Valley, who were going up on the west side of the valley there to cut timber. The indigenous peoples at that time knew you don't go up on the west side in the spring. But the settlers, of course, knew better, and so they went up there and cut timber. And a bunch of them ended up coming down with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. An infectious disease physician by the name of Howard Ricketts was sent from Chicago, and many others too, to figure out exactly what became known as Rocky Mountain spotted fever was due to. Dr. Ricketts, in a couple of years, figured it out. It was an infectious disease. The infection didn't spread from person to person or animal to animal, but it had to go through a tick. And that a vaccine could be produced by going out and collecting ticks, grinding them up, inactivating them with formaldehyde and phenol, and that was the first vaccine, which was developed in the 1920s and the 1930s. And then in around 1928, the first facility of Rocky Mountain Labs was constructed on this site just to the south of what then was downtown Hamilton, and of course now the community has grown up around us. So we presently have a total of about 500 total people working there. We have 22 principal investigators who in the university would be professors. We have 3 laboratories, which in the university would be like departments. And we have 2 branches which provide service. One is our animal program and the other is our technology program. And then we have support for the facilities and the safety and security from other parts of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as well as from the National Institutes of Health. Our campus is about 36 acres, located about 200 yards from the banks of the Bitterroot River. We are divided into 3 laboratories, and I'm going to very quickly show you the individuals who are the principal investigators or professors in those departments. Each laboratory or department has a chairman. That chairman is called a laboratory chief. One of our laboratories is the Laboratory of Bacteriology, and they work on a number of important bacteriological infectious diseases, some of which occur in Indian country and in the state of Montana. Frank works on antimicrobial resistance, and resistance of bacteria to antibiotics is a big problem. Olivia works on, Frank is from Seeley Lake. Olivia is from Ireland. Olivia works on salmonella, and we all hear about salmonella much too frequently. Katie Bozio is originally from Alaska, and she works on bacteria that cause serious pulmonary infections like tularemia and bubonic plague. Ted Hackstad still continues the work on Rocky Mountain spotted fever and also studies chlamydia, which, as you know, I'm sure most of you know, is a serious sexually transmitted disease. Ashley, a very new investigator there, works on the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. We don't have Lyme disease, and you can't catch Lyme disease in the state of Montana because we don't have the right kind of tick. We got plenty of other ticks, but we don't have that one. So people in Montana who have real bona fide Lyme disease caught it somewhere else. And that's, anyway, Ashley works on Lyme disease, and then Lucas, who's originally from Brazil, works on ticks, studying tick physiology. The Laboratory of Neurological Infections and Immunity studies the body's response to infections, normally which are in the brain and central nervous system. Sonia, who was a former trainee of mine, is the chief of that laboratory. She's from Australia, and she works on our body's basic responses to infectious diseases. Karen, who's from Wisconsin, small town in Wisconsin, works on some mosquito-borne virus infections, which may exist in Montana but aren't a serious problem. Bruce, who's the only guy there now who's still older than me, works on prion diseases like chronic wasting disease and similar infections. And Byron Coey, who is, I think, from Colorado, from Fort Collins, also works on the biochemistry and the structure of prion diseases. And then Sue Priola, and I'm not sure where Sue is from, also works on prions. And then Kath Hay, who's also a new investigator, is from the United Kingdom, and she also works on prion diseases. The third lab is the laboratory in which I have my research lab, although I don't have that laboratory. Heinz Feldman is the chief of that laboratory, and he studies a lot of what we call high consequence virus infections like Ebola virus, Marburg virus, and a number of other ones, which thankfully most of us have no experience and don't know too much about. Heinz was actually responsible for inventing the vaccine that saved literally millions of lives in the Ebola virus outbreaks in West Africa in 2013 through 2016. And then you have that old guy in the middle who's trying to become more informed about indigenous research, and I work on tick-borne viruses. Vincent, who's Dutch, works on a number of virus infections, was one of the major players during the coronavirus outbreak, doing a lot of very important work on the basic studies with the SARS coronavirus. And his wife, Emmy DeWitt, who's also Dutch, and Heinz is German, Marshall's from Texas, Vincent is from the Netherlands, Emmy is from the Netherlands, and she also works on respiratory viruses. And then finally, Andrea, who's from Germany, really is an expert on vaccine development. So anyway, that's sort of, in a nutshell, of the various research programs that go on at Rocky Mountain Laboratories. This next slide just shows you some very, very pretty pictures of nasty things, which were all taken at Rocky Mountain Labs, and you can read those names as well as I can. But I think the point I want to make here, in case I forget it later on, is when we talk about careers in research at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and Rocky Mountain Labs, not everyone has to be what we call a lab rat to have an important career in biomedical research. We have a great need for microscopists and for graphic artists. And so that's something that I want to leave with you, because a lot of people may not be interested in biochemistry, but they might be interested in art, and they might be interested in how do we depict what our bodies do and how we fight off infectious diseases. And then, since I work on ticks, I want to tell you just a little bit about ticks, starting off with some amazing graphic art, which was produced by one of our visual art specialists about, well, in the 1940s, so I'm embarrassed to admit how many years ago that was. I never knew this guy. I was born in 1945. But what Tom Moore showed, as you can see, is still very, very applicable today. The rather indeterminate human being on the right-hand panel there is fighting off all the arthropod pests, which bear a number of different viruses and bacteria. And the wood tick on the left side here gives you, in that diagram, shows some of the infectious diseases that are are carried by ticks. So there's two types of ticks in Montana, multiple species of ticks, and around the world there's tens of thousands of different kinds of ticks. Some of them have what are called soft bodies. These are ticks which feed very, very rapidly in a very, very short period of time. We have those in Montana. And we also have the hard-bodied ticks, which are the ones that most of us are familiar with, either on ourselves or on our dogs, and sometimes on livestock and wild animals, game animals. And what do they carry? In the state of Montana, the ones that we know are Colorado tick fever virus, which occurs certainly in the Bitterroot Valley and other places. And there was some mention yesterday about the European explorers Lewis and Clark, and it's thought that Meriwether Lewis actually caught Colorado tick fever when he was ascending what became the Big Hole River. And there are probably other viruses out there which haven't been characterized yet. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that in a minute. Then a bunch of bacteria, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Q fever, which you can catch also from a tick bite, but you can also catch it by aerosol, and is really pretty common among sheep ranchers and sheep shearers. I have a good friend who caught it about 45 years ago attending a sheep shearing clinic at Montana State University. There's no vaccine against that, but it can be treated with antibiotics. Then there's tick-borne relapsing fever, which was first identified in Montana by one of our investigators at Rocky Mountain Labs on Wild Horse Island. This is a tick-borne bacteria which is similar to the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. They're called spirochetes because they look like a curly piece of spaghetti. And that infectious disease and those ticks is a wonderful story I can maybe tell you sometime if you want to hear the story. about how Tom figured out that first outbreak. But it's not confined to Wild Horse Island. The bacteria and the squirrels that carry it and the ticks that carry it are really located all around Flathead Lake. Then tularemia, better known as rabbit fever. And when I was in St. Louis, we always used to say, never eat a rabbit you can catch, because it makes rabbits and other animals pretty sick. And then there are probably other bacteria out there which really haven't been characterized yet. And then there, of course, ticks can also carry a variety of other diseases. Fortunately, none of those have been identified in Montana. But on the other hand, the state of Montana, we haven't looked very hard for them. And it's easier to find things that you look for and hope that you find them before they start causing problems. So how do ticks work? Let's hope this video works. There you go. So here, this is a highly magnified view of a tick, obviously, going across the skin of someone. You can see he's got his mouth parts, which look like a well drilling outfit. And this tick, it's not actually a he, it's actually a female, burrows in, embeds itself. That you can see there, the midgut of the tick and those little grape-like clusters of the salivary glands. And the tick secretes its saliva, and the saliva creates like a little lake of blood. And let's say the video is not going to work all the way. So the little blue things, so I have to narrate this without the benefit of the animation. So the virus is in the blood. The tick takes up that blood. The blood gets into the organs of the tick, infects the tick, doesn't kill the tick. The tick undergoes a molt from one stage to another stage, and the virus carries through that stage somehow that people don't understand. And then the next stage of the tick, when it bites a person, can inject that virus. With Rocky Mountain spotted fever, that transmission of the spotted fever bacteria takes a couple of days. With the kind of virus I work with, the transmission can occur in as short as 15 minutes. So the ticks are very, very well adapted. And the ticks can not only pick up the virus from an infected person or an animal, they can also pick it up from an infected tick. Ticks like to feed very, very close to each other. It's called co-feeding. And you can see in this scanning electron micrograph 2 ticks who are feeding very, very closely to each other. They're feeding on an artificial membrane, and you can see their mouth parts have penetrated that membrane. I apologize that video doesn't work because it's very cool. So how do you prevent tick bites? I'm guessing that most people know, and there's probably some indigenous knowledge here as well as the Western knowledge, is we all know when the ticks are most active, usually in the spring and early summer. They recommend that we wear light-colored clothes and tuck our pants into our socks. Insect repellent like off that has DEET in it works very, very well against ticks. And of course, then when you come home, you want to check yourself for ticks. And wash your clothes, and it's a good idea to try to take a shower. Now, what do you do if you get a tick? Well, there's all sorts. So I put kerosene on it, burn it off. Turns out the best thing to do is to take a pair of forceps or tweezers, gently grab the tick, and sort of slowly pull it straight back out. It'll release its mouth parts, and then once you get it out, put the tick in a little vial, write the date on it, and save it, wash off the bite site with soap and water and then some anesthetic, and then keep an eye out for if you get sick in the next 2 or 3 weeks with a headache and a fever and maybe a rash. And if you do, go to the doctor and take that tick with you. So one of the questions that occurred to me is, are there stories about ticks or other arthropods in the Blackfeet history or in the Blackfeet stories? I'm curious to know, because if there are, well, I hope someone will come up to me afterwards and tell me, because I'd really like to know what those stories are and is there any indigenous knowledge or ideas about ticks in the Blackfeet culture. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about our Native American outreach programs, which Brad alluded to. This is a photograph from 2020 and you may recognize the teacher, and you may recognize some of those students. This is a group of middle school students from up in Browning who came down to visit RML in 2020 before the pandemic became a huge major problem. And so, as I mentioned, I've been engaged in trying to do outreach and learning with Native American schools and educators in the state of Montana for many years. And around 2022, I was able to start a committee, a specific committee for that, called our STEAM Collaborations with Indigenous Peoples. STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And you've heard about that already at this conference, and you're going to hear some more. So what we called our committee was the SKIP committee. These are the current members of that committee. Several of them actually were up here on the Blackfeet Reservation, I think last month, doing some work over at the college with Natalie and Betty. And I'll show you that poster that we made for the open house we had last year in a minute. So the committee members currently are Sarah and Phil, and Megan actually came up, as I mentioned, to Blackfeet College about a month ago and put on a workshop. I don't have any pictures of that, but I have pictures of some of our other outreach efforts. And we have some external advisors to that committee. One is Marie Eggers from Montana State University, and then Moses Levins, who's now a PI at the McLaughlin Research Institute in Great Falls, who's Chippewa Cree. The purpose of our committee is in conjunction with the NIH Tribal Health Research Office to improve NIH's relationship, and particularly Rocky Mountain Laboratories' relationship and collaborative efforts and learning with American Indian and Alaska Native communities. And NIH has, some of you may know, a Tribal Health Research Office, which is specifically dedicated to interactions with the tribes across the United States. And this is a photograph from our open house last summer. This is John Doyle, who's Crow, from the Crow Nation, Crystal Richards, who's from Rocky Mountain Labs, Marie Eggers from Montana State University, and a student from a Little Bighorn College. So the mission of our committee is pretty good. It's to maintain relationships and promote collaboration and communication, to raise awareness about the training programs that are available through RML and NIAID and NIH, to remain a repository of training and education tools for our staff interested in collaborating with the indigenous populations, and to ensure that our efforts comply with the THRO and NIH policy mission and a timely, meaningful example. And of course, there should be another element of that mission to ensure that we become informed about indigenous research methods and methodology. That we should add that in at some point for sure. So we had our first open house in 2023 that was called the Rivers of Knowledge. And for the first time through, it was very successful. We had about 22 members from up here on the Blackfeet, as well as Chippewa Cree, Crow, and some Salish Kootenai folks came and joined our staff and the speakers. And that was the poster that we developed for that meeting. And I had a copy of that printed on aluminum, and it sits very proudly in our visitor center. And I also sent a copy to my immediate director back in Bethesda, Maryland, so it's on the halls of the NIH in Bethesda too, which I'm very proud we were able to do that. And this is some photographs of our participants from our Knowledge of Rivers open house, you may recognize Natalie and a few other folks from up here in that photograph. And we have a website which talks about some of our activities and how to get in touch with us to learn more or teach us more. And we have outreach. Last month we had a couple of guys from Rocky Boy come and learn how to flag for ticks. Then we have a few pictures here from up at Salish Kootenai. And then we have a series of photographs from the Crow when we sent some folks over to the Crow to do a workshop over there. And then this is the poster for our open house, which is coming up in August, on August 8th. And I have some of these flyers, which I'm going to leave with Betty and Natalie. And I hope to see a bunch of you there at this open house. Anyone is welcome to come. And then there are a number of training opportunities that the NIH and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease offer. There's a summer internship program which runs for about 3 months during the summer. That one is, I don't think would work out quite so well for students from Blackfeet, but there's one called Post-Baccalaureate. These are kids who come over to RML for 2 years, 1 to 2 years, right after college before going to graduate school or medical school or veterinary school or nursing school to learn more about kind of the research that we do and the importance of infectious diseases. We've had a couple of Native American IRDAs or postbacks who have come. This is a really good program, which I think might be suitable for some students from Blackfeet and other tribal colleges. The problem, of course, is it's hugely expensive to live in western Montana anymore. So that's a major problem we have to figure out how to deal with. And then another one is called the Undergraduate Scholarship Program, which is a really terrific program because it's designed for all students from underrepresented groups, and Native Americans and indigenous peoples from the state of Montana and elsewhere would certainly qualify for that program. It basically underwrites college education with the stipulation that once the students graduate, they spend a couple of years working at NIAID or NIH. So it's a terrific program. We've had a couple of students who've participated in that. Both of them, Salish Kootenai, Caleb Marceau, and I asked him to sort of sketch out his career path. And you can see he started off at SKC, and he's now a very, very prominent infectious disease scientist down in the San Francisco Bay Area. And his older brother, Josh, you can see also started off at Salish Kootenai. Then he got a PhD at the University of Montana. And he was probably the first Blackfeet person, maybe even the first Native American to be trained to work at biosafety level 4 on infectious diseases like Ebola virus. He's a wonderful kid, and he didn't work in my lab, but I mentored him a lot, and we're still in touch. And he's currently, this slide's a little bit out of date, he's currently working at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle in their diversity and outreach programs. So those are two very successful participants in the undergraduate scholarship program who went on to have a very successful career in biomedical research. And then, since I work for the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Tony Fauci asked me in 2020 to take part in a rural health symposium at the NIH, and I did it virtually at that time. It was about 2 months before I caught COVID-19 and ended up in the ICU for 5 days. But I think I recovered from that. And as part of that, Tony told me, he says, I want you to talk about the impacts of infectious diseases on Native American populations in Indian country. And so I put that talk together, and the harder I worked on it, the madder I got about all the problems that infectious diseases are serious enough and the unique features that made it even more problematic in Indian country. And you can see some of the special problems, and you're aware of all these problems, of course, better than I, but they have an impact on infectious diseases. There are scattered populations, multi-generational housing. Sometimes the municipal water systems are not very good, if at all. Sometimes the sewage infrastructure is not adequate. Poor internet communication and connectivity among the dispersed people. A lot of comorbidities, strained, almost non-existent tribal health resources in some time. And then for the coronavirus pandemic, the Native Americans had a hell of a time trying to get the money that the federal government had allocated for them. So these were some specific problems. And as I was preparing that talk, I did some research, and there was a wonderful quote from one of the Crow leaders describing the COVID pandemic as an enemy that can't be seen. And then an even better quote from someone who was your tribal council vice chair at that time, Scott Kipp. We look back at what happened to our people all those years back when the smallpox came through. There are so many things going on now that parallel what happened back then. Boy, is that true. When I read that, it really got me thinking. And then I remembered that we had had some middle school students from Rocky Boy come over, Box Elder, come over and visit the lab, because they had read this book, those Native American students over there had read this book called Rotting Face, which was about the experiences of the American Indians with smallpox. And rotting face was one of the terms, at least in some of the tribes, that was applied to smallpox because of the sores all over the body, which really, really rotted. And most of you will know that smallpox is just one of many infectious diseases which were unleashed among all the indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere when the first European invaders set foot in Central America back in the late 15th century. But smallpox, and so it had horrible impacts on all of the indigenous people across the United States, way before the time of Lewis and Clark and European travelers to Montana and the Northwest. So this is in fact, the illustration on the cover of that book was actually taken from some Aztec, from Mexican tribes. So I think that's, the lesson is that I think in infectious diseases, and I'm a little bit biased because I work in infectious diseases, I think infectious diseases have particular importance when we talk about our indigenous populations. And I think we need to do a better job. We at NIH and Rocky Mountain Lab need to do a better job. And what I've come to appreciate through my contacts with Betty and Natalie and Brad and listening to the talks and the elders at this conference and the conference last year, we need to do better, and we have to integrate the indigenous knowledge and research methods into the science that we're doing. It's going to be critical. It's going to be absolutely critical because there's wisdom there and knowledge there and information there that we're not going to be able to accumulate and develop simply using the sort of Western style research, which is also important. So that's my final message. And I want to thank you for inviting me to be with you today and for the particular honor of allowing an old white guy from the Bitterroot Valley to talk to you and meet with you and have lunch and breakfast with you. So I especially want to acknowledge my special Blackfeet friends, Brad, Natalie, Betty, Shane, and all of the others I've had the pleasure of talking to, the community college for being so welcoming and helpful, the NARCH committee on which I sit as on the advisory committee, our RML SCIP committee, and Dr. Karina Walters, who's the new head of the NIH Tribal Health Research Office, who actually has some friends that live over here in Browning, I found out. And Carrie Long at RML, Joe Aspinwall, who provided me with some of the pictures that I showed, and my two assistants, Susie and Caitlin, and I am supported by the NIA Intramural Research Program. And with that, this is the end of my formal presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and if any of you want to know about this H5N1, which is going around in the cattle herds and the dairy herds across the country, I'd be happy to talk to you about that maybe over lunch. So anyway, thank you very much for your welcome, and thank you very much for your patience.